morning, everyone. I'm super excited to be here. This one is a special one for me. I did my undergrad here, and I once sat in your very shoes, so I know what it feels like to be in your chair. I understand the struggle. I know that black cloud that follows you around when you're out with friends, and in the back of your head you're thinking about, I should be in the lab, I should be studying, I should be doing all of these things. And I'm here to tell you that it works out, and in the end, if we go through some of these things we're going to talk about today, there's a lot of opportunity for you coming out of this university to really achieve everything that you want to achieve with your career going forward. So as we go here, this is a little bit of my background. You can see it's always a little scary when you summarize 12 years of your life on one PowerPoint slide, but this is everything that my journey has been to this point. I'm very much a California-trained doctor. This is where I've done all my training. This is where I work currently. So for those of you interested in California medical schools and that experience, I'm more than happy to share all of that with you as we go here. Along the way, my experience with medical school admissions began early. I obviously went through the process and was fortunate to have some success. And what came with that was wanting to share my own experience and kind of give back to people like you who maybe don't have quite all of the perspective that I do, having gone through it. And I think the point I like to make with this is that I didn't know anything that we're going to cover in this presentation. I sat in your shoes and went through the whole process with none of these tips, tricks, advice, secrets, everything that I've kind of distilled down in this presentation today, and it turned out just fine. So if you walk away from here, you forget everything that I've said, and you take nothing away, you can work. It can totally work. But my goal for you with this presentation, and for all of the students that we work with at MedSchoolCoach, ultimately, is to give you that head start, to give you these tips, tricks, the secrets that you really can only understand having been through the process and sat in that room and reviewed thousands of these applications over and over and over. So that's what I have distilled down for you today as we go through kind of some advice on how to build a successful application. So as we are kind of thinking big picture here about what we're trying to accomplish, we're going to start just with a quick overview of why building an important application matters. And we'll look at the statistics of applicants that are getting in and those that are not, and what this process really looks like in reality today. And then we'll go through some key factors I want to highlight to really draw your attention to what it is that's making an application stand out. You're going to be in a stack of thousands of applications, right? What is going to make your application, words on paper, jump out compared to the very next application that someone like me is going to read in this process? And ultimately, again, my goal is to kind of share a quick, rapid-fire, high-yield summary of everything that I've kind of taken away. So number one is, why does this matter? And this is a summary from the most recent application cycle. And I want to say, I understand that these numbers are a little bit scary, right? When you distill down the number of applicants and then the number who got in the last cycle, this means that 56% of people who applied ultimately did not get into a USMD medical school. That's where these statistics come from. And as we summarize all of the information we have going all the way back to 2021, only about 42% of applicants are getting into a USMD school. And we'll talk about some other pathways here in a minute, but I want to emphasize this is a super competitive process. This is one of the most competitive higher education processes in the world that we're applying into, right? So making sure that we're taking advantage of every opportunity we have to put yourself in that position to be successful is critically important. So when I'm thinking about this process, I kind of encourage people to break this down into thirds. It'll be 1/3 MCAT, 1/3 GPA, and then 1/3 everything else. So in the grand scheme here, the stats are obviously critically important, right? That's going to make up 66% of the entire thing will be your GPA and your MCAT score. But I want to call your attention specifically up to this corner. I don't know if you can see these numbers, but this is kind of the highest bucket statistically, where we're working here with applicants that have near perfect MCAT scores and a GPA above a 3.8. So statistically speaking, these are some super competitive applicants, right? But then I want you to look kind of at their overall chances of success here. Many of you have probably seen this chart, but it's basically taking applicants' MCAT scores and then their GPA, and you meet on that chart, and it kind of spits out your overall chances of success based on those two numbers. So in this highest bucket, where some of the most competitive applicants are, you can see it's still only spitting out 65, 70, 80% chance of success. And these are applicants that have almost perfect statistics. So my point with this is that even as we zoom in further, this is a 4.0 GPA with an MCAT score above 517. That only spits out an 82% chance of success. So with almost perfect stats, the numbers are telling us that your chances of success are only 80%. So what that means is that there's a lot more to this than just the numbers. If it was a numbers game only, that would be 100%, right? I think that makes sense. So where does that answer lie? And why is it only 80 instead of 100? And ultimately, that's this everything else category here. So when we're talking about how to interpret these numbers, it's one thing to say, hey, here's my GPA and here's my stats, what's going to happen, right? But the more interesting question is, who are the applicants with stats that look like mine that are getting in, and who are the applicants with stats that look like mine that are not? And that is, a little bit subjective. The numbers we like because they're objective, and we can play with stats, and we can say this and that. But this everything else category is very subjective. And that's why we emphasize all of these things, the extracurriculars, letters of recommendation, really putting together that complete application with cohesive secondaries and essays. And then, of course, the interview at the end. That answer for who gets in with stats like yours and who does not lies somewhere in this everything else category. And that's really why I want to focus so much on that as we go forward today. So I mentioned we touch on some other options as well, right? Those numbers, I understand on that previous slide, can be a little scary. But that's not the only pathway to becoming a doctor, and we know that. There are options like applying to DO schools, like applying to the Caribbean schools. You can see some of the averages for applicants that are getting into those schools here. I understand the acceptance rates look similar-ish to those of USMD schools, but with lower average statistics. That does open the door for plenty of people. And we could have a whole separate conversation about kind of the nuances of coming out of some of these programs and what that means for residency match rates and all these things. But what I want to ask you is, what is it that a graduate of a DO program or a Caribbean medical school, what do you call them throughout their career? A doctor, correct, right? So if this is a pathway that allows you to achieve that goal of becoming a doctor, this is a pathway that everyone should explore and everyone should be open to, because really opening that door is the bottleneck that we have to get all of the applicants through who really want to become doctors in the future. So this is just a brief overview of the differences between the MD application process using the AMCAS system, the DO application process, and then the Texas schools, most of which have their own separate application, which is very mean of them, but they do their own thing, and that's just how it is. As you can see, generally speaking, we want this application to be ready to go in May of the application year, okay? And this is where I make the important point of emphasizing the timeline, because ultimately, applicants that at the front of the line have a greater likelihood of success than applicants that are at the back of the line. And that's not because admissions decisions are rolling, although some of them are, but we know for sure that who's getting an interview, and those decisions are rolling, right? So at the beginning of the cycle, if you're the first application they look at, there's maybe 800, 1,000 interview slots available. But if you're a few weeks late submitting that application, suddenly there's 5,000 applicants ahead of yours. By the time they get to your application, maybe there's only 500 interview slots. And suddenly, just based on the timing alone, you've made this a little bit harder on yourself just by that simple fact in itself. So the point of this is to emphasize timeline and to be really, really ultra prepared heading into the cycle so that you can make the most of that. And then here's kind of a big picture overview of what the application year looks like over time and kind of what you should be thinking about at each of these different time points. We have a similar version of this available in your pamphlet here that you can review as well. But what I want to start getting into now is how to craft that application, because I think this is really the meat of the presentation today and where this information offers the greatest opportunity for you to start separating yourself from other applicants. So as we go here, we're going to start first with our personal statement. And the way I want you to think about this, just from a 1,000-foot view of what we're trying to accomplish with a personal statement. In its purest form, a personal statement should be a story, right? You are the main character of the story, and over the course of that story, you, as the main character, are going to undergo an evolution. You're going to grow. You're going to develop skills. But the story has to start with your motivation for why you're doing this. Why is it that you're telling me you're going to devote 10 to 12 years of your life to go through a rigorous training experience to stand here at the age of 32, having just started a career, right? That takes a lot of motivation. And what the schools are looking for is students who have a goal and are working towards something, because those are the applicants that make it through this process. And ultimately, that's what we're looking for as the launching point for your story in the personal statement. Once you've established that motivation, the rest of the essay becomes really easy to write, because you've told me why you've set out on your journey. Then you're going to give me the stepping stones along your journey that have allowed you to build and develop your skills. So as we go, the most important thing we have to determine is the answer to this question, because this is your motivation. Why are you doing this? And this answer needs to be front and center in the personal statement. There's a big misconception in applications that this personal statement needs to be this elaborate work of art with this read between the lines and we tie together these complex narratives. Someone is going to spend about 60 seconds to 2 minutes reading this essay. They are not going to spend 50 to 100 hours going through the application and reading and putting together the essay like you have. So you're going to understand all the nuances of what you're trying to say and the read between the lines. But I promise you, if you leave things unsaid and you leave it up to the reader to interpret why you want to be a doctor, you're doing yourself a huge disservice. This answer needs to be spelled out explicitly so that the reader understands your motivation for doing this. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to be a member of the committee. I'm going to show you some real examples that I've had from applications that I've reviewed. I'm going to give you a minute to read this, and then we're going to talk about what we like, what we don't like, and what can be better. We'll take a moment to review here. What do we think about this one? Yeah. Okay, I agree. Okay. Just generally speaking, how many people think this is good? How many think this could use a little bit of work? Yeah, I agree here, right? And then we're going to give this one, this gets a big red X, okay? This is simply not enough anymore to write in this essay that you like science and that the human body is fascinating. Because at 4 a.m. in the morning on a 24-hour call shift, when you're woken up on no sleep, the human body being fascinating is not going to get you through it, right? That's not going to be enough anymore. And we know that from years of experience. So simply saying that you're interested in the human body and that science is cool, that doesn't get you through 10 years of training, and that's not going to be enough to write an essay about, right? So let's try again. Here's another one here. We'll use this to illustrate a slightly different point. Now we'll ask again. How many like this one? It's better. Yeah, we're getting there. Yeah. How many think this could use a little bit of work? Great. What are some problems we see with this one? You can just shout. It's all good.
That there's other careers that you can do the same with. Like you could just be in research and it's still intellectually stimulating and you're still solving complex problems. You're still advancing science. It doesn't really tell you why a doctor.
I wish you could read my presenter notes that I have here, because it is exactly that point, okay? When we are answering this question, the person reading should not be able to say, okay, great, why don't you go do this? Why don't you go be a nurse? Why don't you go be a nurse practitioner? Why don't you go be a PA? Why don't you go into social work? Why don't you go be a scientist, right? There's a lot of different ways that we could accomplish the goals that we're telling the reader we want to accomplish in this essay. So my point with this is that the answer to why do you want to be a doctor must be specific to the role of the doctor, right? I should not be able to read your answer and say, great, go do something else. Because as soon as the reader has that opportunity, your application goes from this pile into the no pile, because you would be just fine doing something else to accomplish the goals that you've told me, right? So we have to be really, really careful of that, and that's why this one gets a big red X. Okay, now here's another one. Let's see what we think here. Okay, what do we think about this one? How many like it? Oh, wow, I like. Good, good, good. How many don't like it? Okay. We've got one taker for don't like it. I wrote this one, so that's a deep cut. No, this is from another application that I pulled. Now, what I want to highlight about this one is ultimately this gives us those two criteria that we're looking for. What we are stating as our goal here with this answer is very specific to the role of the doctor, right? There's not a lot of other things I could say, great, go do this, and you'd be able to accomplish those goals, right? So that's number one. And number two, there's a pretty deep element to this. This ability to really help and support using that medical knowledge and using the skills that you have, leading a healthcare team. You know, these are really tangible, clear goals that I know will get you through those tough times and will get you through that 8 to 10 years of grinding that it takes to really become that successful doctor at the end of the day. So this one, big check mark. We like this one. This one's pretty powerful, and something to that effect is going to be great. Yes, please.
I feel like the hardest thing is like making it clear between physician or nurse, like you said, or
Yeah.
something else that's also helping patients and all that. So what do you think are the things that make it clear to them?
Yeah.
Because they could also interpret this as why not nurse?
Totally. So in my mind, you know, there's an extensive list of things that are specific to the role of the doctor, but the ones that I see come up most commonly, number one is leadership, right? Your role as the doctor in any healthcare team is to be the leader of that team, ultimately. Whether you're working with a team of nurses, nurse practitioners, PAs, whatever it is, you will always be the leader of that team. So emphasizing that you want to lead the healthcare team will always be specific to the role of the doctor, right? So that's one thing. The other thing that I see work really well is this idea of bridging the gap between research and the clinic. Very few of these other roles have a research component and a clinical component. The role of the doctor to go back and forth between those two environments is pretty unique, right? So your ability to say, hey, you know, I have these research skills, this is what I've accomplished this far. I also have these clinical skills, ability to connect with others, build relationships with others. My goal, and the reason I want to be a doctor, is to bridge that gap, to bring those answers that I'm figuring out in the lab to the clinic to help patients going forward, right? Those things, in my mind, are the most effective, you know, themes that you can use to build an answer that is very specific to the role of the doctor, because ultimately, there's no real other option that accomplishes those. Yeah, of course. Any other questions here? Very good, very good. Okay, so now as we're talking about, you know, we've kind of hashed out the why do you want to be a doctor portion. This is the answer that you put in the intro. That is your launching point on the rest of your journey. Now you've told me why you're doing this. So now tell me what it is that you've done since you decided to set out on this journey. And what we're looking for are ultimately the skills that you've taken away from that work, right? You've told me what your goal is. Now I need to understand, have you developed and worked to develop skills that are going to allow you to accomplish that goal? And the way you're going to do that is in the body paragraphs, using stories and details to illustrate the skills that you've developed. So in its big picture format here, I know why you're doing this, and now I know the skills that you're going to use to accomplish that goal. And that's really what we want to do. And this is that idea of show, don't tell that comes up all the time, right? So what we need to do in these body paragraphs is show me that you have the skills to accomplish your goal. That's what we're looking for here. Okay, so here we go. You're back in the role of the admissions committee. You're reading a body paragraph, and this is what you read. What do we think here? How many like it? No takers. This is a tough crowd. You guys would be a tough committee. How many think it needs some work? Yeah. Okay, so someone tell me why this one needs some work. Yeah.
It could be like a HIPAA violation. I mean, you're saying the patient's name.
Sure, sure. We'll give the benefit of the doubt. Hopefully, that's been either adjusted in some way, and that's not the real patient's name, but I agree. I think that could definitely be an issue. What else could be issues? Yeah.
There's a lot of focus on the physician and not on the applicant.
Yeah, totally. So ultimately, the question I asked with this one is, who is applying to medical school here? Is it Dr. Haywood? Is Dr. Haywood applying to medical school? No. So why would I care about what Dr. Haywood is doing well in this story? Right? That doesn't help me at all. And ultimately, my point with this is that we can't build our argument for why you are going to be a good doctor because you have seen other good doctors, right? It doesn't work, right? That's going to fall apart instantly. So when you're talking about these experiences that you've done, you have to be the main character. You have to be the doer of every story. As soon as you find yourself saying, oh, I remember so-and-so who took really good care of my loved one or my family member, you have to be the main character of that sentence. Suddenly, you're talking about somebody else, and that is going to be incredibly weak at the end of the day. Yes? No?
Would it be okay to kind of focus on some other doctor, not yourself, when you're explaining why you want to be a doctor? I also want to do these things that you said with your grandpa or whatever. Like you saw how a doctor helped him, and you want to be able to help other people.
Right.
Not like that.
So as an example here, you're potentially giving me a story that says, I have this loved one who went through this challenging time, and I remember how impactful it was that Dr. Smith helped us go through that time because they really connected with us and helped us with all that, right? Okay, let's just reframe that quickly and say, put you as the main character. You're going to say, hey, I remember going through this experience. I remember I was feeling confused and scared, and I was, seeking answers that I couldn't quite find. And I took initiative to try to find some of those answers, but ultimately I know that I hit a roadblock in trying to help my loved one. And I didn't like hitting that wall. So the reason that you're getting to at that point that you want to become a doctor is to help other people like your loved one, right? We can totally cut out this other doctor from this story and only focus on your experience going through that exact same story. By doing that, it puts you as the main character, and it tees up an answer that makes sense for why you're pursuing this career. It's a simple shift in the framework, and if you just force yourself to keep your main character as the main character, it will force you to write in this way, and it makes a huge difference ultimately when the reader is trying to understand you and your skills. Yeah. So, big red X. You must be the main character. Very good. Okay, let's try again. Okay. Okay, committee, what do we think? We like? Who likes? Nice. Anyone not like? It's okay. Huh?
I'm not
This one is really, really good. And this I included in order to really showcase the show, don't tell idea, okay? When we're talking about show, don't tell, there's two ways that you could tell this story. You can say, I worked with this patient and I used my compassion to make a connection and build a relationship with this patient. You could do that. You could tell me that you are compassionate. That's fine. That's one way. But the other way, the much more effective way, is you tell this story in a way that shows me that you have the skills of compassion. Where we're talking about connecting on a personal level, when we're talking about listening, when you're talking about going that extra mile to spend this extra time with this patient and get to know them, ultimately what you're doing is showing me those skills. And this distinction is super, super critical. And it doesn't require a lot of words to do it effectively. But I want to see in the details of your story the skill that you're trying to emphasize, right? Here it's compassion and empathy. When you're talking about the details of what you did tangibly in that moment, using those skills, that's how you do the show, not the tell. And this distinction is really, really critical in terms of writing effective body paragraphs that are going to illustrate your skills. Any questions on that? This is that show don't tell thing. You read this on Student Doctor, Network, blog, all the websites all the time. This is what that actually means in reality, okay? Green check mark, very, very good here. So, in summary, this is what we're trying to accomplish with the personal statement. We need your answer to why do you want to be a doctor. It should tee up and set up your career goals, why you're doing this, what you hope to accomplish this. And then once you've kind of launched out on that journey, the body paragraphs are stepping stones. And along those stepping stones, you're picking up a tool or a couple tools, and you're putting those tools in your toolbox. Along your journey, you have 3 body paragraphs. You're going to pick up 3 skills. At the end, now we're in the conclusion, you're going to make the argument that, look, I'm already putting in the time and energy to work towards my goals. I have already developed these key skills that are helping me accomplish what I've set out to achieve. But the next piece that I need is the knowledge and skills that comes from medical school. That's what I really ultimately am looking for to accomplish that goal. I have some of the skills, and I'm working towards developing those, but really now what I need is that knowledge and skills from medical school. That's why I want to be a doctor. That's why you should choose me. It writes itself, okay? This is how to put together an effective personal statement. These are the essays that stand out. Clear, concise, to the point. I take away your motivation and the skills that you have to offer. That's all you can hope for with this essay. I'll pause there. Questions on personal statement before we move on? All make sense? Yes?
Do you think you should have around 3 different experiences that talk about 3 different skills?
I do. The most common format for these is a 5-paragraph essay. Intro, 3 body paragraphs, conclusion. And that allows you to do 3 skills. Now, if you want to do 2 skills and really build out those stories and include some extra details and you need the extra characters to do that, by all means, that's fine. I have no issue with that. I think that'll work effectively. But generally speaking, 2 to 3. Yeah. Yeah.
Do all the skills that you mentioned in personal statement has to be like medical related, or can it be?
Love this question. This is great. So this is getting at the secret sauce of what medical schools are looking for. What skills do the schools want you to highlight in the personal statement, in the activities, etc.? There is a list on the AMCAS website of the core competencies of incoming medical students. This is published by AMCAS. So guess what all of the medical schools are looking for? Applicants that have those core competencies. The answers are right there. This is exactly what they have spelled out through years of research and experience makes an effective medical student. Those are the skills that you want to highlight throughout the application. It's ultimately not a secret. They've told us the answers, but I would say 60, 70% of applications don't illustrate any of these skills, and it leaves me with my hands tied because I don't know if you're going to be able to be successful as a medical student. So to answer your question, it's there. There's 17 points. Highlight those skills. Use those points. That's what we're looking for. Totally. Yeah?
So as long as you can kind of tie back to those core competencies, it doesn't necessarily have to be medical. Of course, like, there should be some stuff that's medical related.
Totally.
Let's say, like you said, good job.
Totally. Look, one of those is a skill called cultural competence. Cultural competence is your ability to connect with and build a relationship with someone who's of a different background, socioeconomic status, ethnicity than yourself, okay? You don't need to tell a story that shows me that from the clinic. You could just have easily had a service experience where you met a patient or even someone at a community health clinic or a food clinic or any sort of service experience, non-clinical, in East LA, and you had to build that relationship with someone who's different than you. That doesn't have anything to do with medicine necessarily, but it's your ability to build a relationship. That's what illustrates the cultural competence aspect of things. It doesn't have to be in a clinical setting. It's anytime you're using those skills in anything that you've accomplished. That's it, totally. Yes?
Are those core competencies always going to be the same?
They change year to year. That being said, I haven't seen them change in the past 2 to 3 at least. The core things that are going to make you a successful doctor are going to stay the same. Compassion, empathy, all of the research ones, critical thinking, problem solving, determination, perseverance. When you really boil it down, 1 to 2 might change in a year, but for the most part, those core competencies will stay the same. Yeah, totally. Other questions before we do activities? Let's roll. Here we go. Okay, so now we've covered the personal statement. Let's move on to activities, extracurriculars, that section of the essay, or that section of the application. So these are all of the most common buckets that we need to fill on this application. These are the categories that the schools are looking for. And what we're going to do is kind of go through one by one and kind of just quick hit top points, secrets for each of these types of experiences that I want to share with you. Starting first with clinical experience. Clinical experience is far and away the #1 single most important category of extracurriculars, and I think you can guess why. If I need to understand the skills that are going to make you a good doctor, the first thing I want to see is what skills you've built interacting with patients, right? Every single day, what is a doctor doing for the most part? Interacting with patients. I need to see that you've spent time interacting with patients, right? And what that's going to allow you to do, that direct patient contact, is show me all of those compassion, empathy, cultural competence even, all of those core competencies that are relationship and social based. That's where you do it, is with clinical experiences like this, okay? Now, the kind of point here is that there are lots of clinical experiences out there, right? There's lots of opportunities over at Reagan that I remember distinctly. And what I want to caution you with here is the fact that not all clinical experiences are created equal, right? The more time that you're spending directly with patients, the better. You can have 300 hours of a clinical experience, and 280 of that can be changing bed sheets, restocking shelves, helping the nurse, go get things, medications from the lab, right? None of that is ultimately what we want from a clinical experience. You need, throughout this entire application process, the stories, the times that you've spent interacting with the patients. Obviously, you need them for the personal statement. You're going to need them again in the activities. Then you're going to need them again in secondaries. Then you're going to need them again when you're interviewing, right? So if 280 of those hours are stocking shelves, you're going to pull stories from 20 hours? It's going to be really hard. So when you're evaluating clinical experiences, whether it's right now or during a gap year, one of the first things to the top of your mind is how much time am I spending directly with patients? That's #1, above and beyond, the most important thing you need to be thinking of here. And then point #2 is those stories, right? So what I've seen most effectively is applicants who actually take quick little notes when they have an impactful interaction with patients, so that when it comes time to write down the road, that story, that experience comes back to you, and you kind of have that in your pocket to use in an essay, to use in secondaries, to use when you're crafting an interview answer. But if you kind of just show up every day and you go through the motions and you're not really paying attention to what's going on, you're kind of losing the most important part of these experiences. So keep a little journal, jot some notes down, keep a rough list of the different experiences that you've had, because it'll save you a lot of time when it comes time for the application. And then the final point here, and this is going to be a common thread throughout any of these extracurriculars, is when you see an opportunity to take on more responsibility within any experience, jump at that opportunity, right? Whether it's graduating from the intern level to the next rung up on the totem pole, right? That simple graduation for you might not make a big difference, but on paper, what that demonstrates is that somebody recognized the work and the time that you were putting in. Somebody recognized the skills that you had to offer and allowed you to take on added responsibility, right? So for you, it might not seem like a big deal, but on paper, for someone evaluating the application, that's how I know that you were successful in that role. Somebody trusted you, and you really earned that added level of responsibility that came with that. So when there's an opportunity to take on that extra role, jump at it. And we'll talk about where that comes back to really be impactful in just a minute. I'll pause here briefly. Questions on clinical experience? Yeah.
This may come off as like a silly question, but I just want to understand what are like the more popular types of like clinical experience medical schools are looking for?
I'd say the kind of like clinical assistant role, tech role is very, very common because there's a ton of patient contact there. Clinical research coordinator roles come up a lot. It's a great opportunity between research and the clinic. If you're coordinating patients that are involved in a clinical study, you have the opportunity to be doing simultaneously research and interaction with patients at the same time, which is incredibly valuable. I always caution people a little bit. The next most common one that comes up is the scribe role, okay? And certainly clinical, of course, but it is very easy to be a scribe and sit in the corner and not speak to a patient once an entire day. So you've gone through 8 hours of work, you did your shift, and you're going home feeling good, and ultimately you didn't even interact with a single patient that day. So I always caution people in the scribe role, if you're going to be in that role, you've got to be active, hands-on, and the physicians or team that you're working with have to be open to that. If you're expected to sit there and be quiet and type, ultimately that scribe role is not going to help you the way we want it to. And that's important. It's really important. So I'd say those three. EMT is something that people do a lot. I see that all the time. Recently, people have been getting involved with hospice work. There's a lot of opportunity to volunteer through hospice organizations where they need assistance, and there's tons of opportunity to go into people's homes where they're getting hospice care and interact directly with them. Those are the most common ones. But on our website, if you want to search, we have a list of the most common and effective clinical experiences for both a gap year and during your undergrad. Yeah, of course. Okay, we got a motor here. I'm too long-winded. We got to make some moves. Next most important, research experience. This is going to be number 2 on our list of priorities here. Main point, big takeaway here with research. Beyond a certain level of hours, the hours themselves are no longer helping separate you from other applicants, right? You know, I'd say on average, the person who's getting in today's world has somewhere maybe 500 to 1,000 hours, somewhere in there. But what they also have is a tangible outcome that showcases what they've been able to accomplish during that time, right? So that's a poster presentation, that's an abstract, that's a manuscript, that's any sort of tangible outcome from your work that you've submitted somewhere. It's undergone a peer review process, and it's been selected for publication, presentation, any of these things, okay? I watch every cycle over and over and over again. Applicants come to me, and they're super proud of their 3,000 hours of research experience. And I say, great, but what do we have to show for that time? And then the answer is nothing. And that kills me inside, because ultimately I know that the applicant who's only done 500 hours of research but has that tangible outcome will be favored over the applicant with 3,000 hours. So ultimately, we're talking about 2,000 wasted hours here, okay? This is critically important in research. We are working towards outcomes. What I'm looking for is, of course, that you have the basic research skills to exist in a team and work on a project and all of these things. But I'm also looking if you understand the scientific method, right? And to really understand the scientific method, you've got to take a project from start to finish. And if I don't have anything to show for the finish line, my question, and I've asked applicants this during interviews, is what were you doing for all of that time, right? Those 3,000 hours, what was going on? I don't think it could be that meaningful because we don't really have anything to show for it. And it's a tough interview question, and I don't mean to be mean to these applicants, but I have to understand what was going on during that time. And I don't want any of you to be in that situation. So the focus up front is yes on the time, but more importantly, it's what you're doing with that time, and we want to be productive and we want to have these tangible outcomes to show that you're able to take a project to the finish line. Now, point number 2 kind of goes along with that, and the idea is that you need to have the opportunity to take on a project or work closely in the direction of a project to really showcase that start to finish. If you're kind of just tagging along, showing up to the lab every day, cleaning some test tubes and feeding some cells, which I did here in that building right over there, I understand, the impact of that is not going to be quite as great as when you have the opportunity to really take on your own project and showcase that on the application. And then finally, this ongoing point of the leadership double dip. We'll pause there and we'll cover it on the next slide, which is going to be leadership. Questions on research? Yes?
How would you start to take on your own projects?
Yeah. Again, it doesn't have to be your own project necessarily, but you want to be involved in the direction, decision-making, design of a project, right? So if that means working closely with a postdoc who's got a great idea that they want to work on and you're kind of their right-hand person to do it, great. By all means, that works really well. But ultimately, it's a level of interest that you're showing and kind of a mastery of the subject matter that you're dealing with. Right? If you're demonstrating to someone, A, that you care and that you want to be involved, and then B, that you get it and that you can kind of start thinking at that upper level as opposed to I show up, I do what I'm told, instead I show up and I have ideas of future directions, that's the distinction that I think opens that door for people, for sure. Yeah?
Do you think being into initiative is more dependent on yourself or more dependent on the lab that you're in?
I think that's a two-way street for sure. And that's why for the applicants that I work with, I always encourage some of these conversations to happen up front. You're considering multiple different labs, there's multiple different opportunities. You can't walk in there and be like, yo, I want a poster, I'm here to get a poster, can you give me a poster, right? That's not what we want to do. But you can walk in there and say, hey, here are my goals. I'm applying to medical school. I know that in order to be a successful applicant, tangible outcomes can really help improve my application. I'm someone who's going to put in the time and put in the energy. I want to kind of get an idea of what that will lead to in this lab down the road, right? Two different ways you can kind of get at the same thing without being too pushy, and you obviously don't want to come off as that person who only cares about the outcome. Nobody wants that, right? So you have to be a little strategic about it, but it's all about how you word it. You don't want to work somewhere where they're not going to prioritize that. That's how you do 3,000 hours with nothing, right? And we don't want that. Yeah?
For MD, PhD applicants, should you have more than one research project, even though it has so much tangible impact?
I would say the MD, PhD process is its own beast because you're going to have that research built in. I think if you've got one really impactful project that was your thesis for your PhD, that's going to cover those bases for sure. Totally. I think that'll take care of that, no doubt. Yeah?
So for activities, you need to put somebody that they can contact
Mm-hmm.
to make sure. If you were to have done a research, but so an independent project, something that you did without being an assistant to somebody else, you just did it. What do you do?
Yeah. And this is true of the listing for contacts on the application as a whole. Somebody simply needs to be able to say, yes, this applicant did this, no, this applicant did not do this. So just somebody in the world needs to have an idea that you worked on this and that you did this and can verify that you did that. That's the point of the contact information that you're listing. It doesn't necessarily need to be, this person who's got the intimate knowledge of your project specifically, because that might not exist. But the person working next to you in the lab should certainly be able to say, I watched this applicant do this. Is that fair? Yeah. Okay, good on research for now? Beautiful. Let's do leadership. Next most important category here. Main point with leadership is to kind of keep an open mind here. Leadership does not need to be, I was president of this club or this organization. Not necessarily, okay? We can use a wide variety of experiences to showcase your leadership skills. Sometimes that's as simple as, I took on this added role. I became in charge of scheduling the people in the lab. I became in charge of training new lab members in this specific technique or teaching them this, right? Suddenly now we carve out a role on the application that is new lab member educator or scheduling, lead or something like that. And then we can carve out, some of those hours to say, hey, there was a leadership component to this, and we list a separate entry in your activities that is just the leadership component. And that allows us to recategorize some of those hours to say and showcase your leadership skills. So leadership, I think, is sometimes the most kind of overwhelming and least defined option for applicants. But I'm here to tell you, you're already putting in time and energy into all these different extracurriculars that you're doing. Take that next step and simply carve out your own role, project, initiative, whatever it is, and then we list that as leadership. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here, and you don't need to be president of this, this, and this. There's a lot of different ways we can showcase leadership skills. And that's why I have this idea of the leadership double dip on all of the different slides. In any of these things you're doing, take that opportunity to take on that extra role, and you can double dip in these experiences. In your lab, you can do both leadership and gain research skills, right? There's a lot of opportunity to kind of kill two birds with one stone there. I know how stressful your lives are sitting in this situation. There's so many different things you're trying to do. You're getting pulled in 100 different directions. You're volunteering in all these different things. So when you have the opportunity to double dip, I always recommend my applicants take advantage of that. Now, the final thing is don't be afraid to start from scratch. And this will go hand in hand with our next one, which is the service experience, because the easiest way to kind of start from scratch is in the service world. But if there's something that you're interested in, if there's an idea that you have, if there's something that you want to pursue, go do it, right? Suddenly, if there's this opportunity in a local food bank or homeless shelter nearby or something like that, you take that opportunity to go explore and see if they need a volunteer. Suddenly, you start volunteering, you develop a good relationship with them, you're there for a couple months, maybe you get a friend involved, right? Then maybe you get another friend involved. Suddenly, the three of you are, by definition, the founders of a new initiative, a new club, a new organization. Each of you takes on an executive board role. One of you is the president, the vice president, one of you is the treasurer. And just by doing what you were already going to do, you were already going to go volunteer somewhere. You were already going to go do some community service. Just by taking that one step further and kind of formalizing that, getting some other people involved, suddenly you double dip and you have the opportunity to showcase a really impactful leadership experience without that much extra work. You were already doing all of those things anyway. Just take advantage of the opportunity to really capitalize on that. That's the leadership spiel. Questions on leadership? Very good. Yeah? Yeah, so that's a great question. In its purest form, no. The one thing that's missing from here is is teaching, because it's quite flexible and it can kind of move around. When you list a teaching experience on the application, you will categorize that as leadership. You will categorize that as teaching. Now, when you're discussing what you did, perhaps in secondaries or elsewhere on the application, you can highlight the leadership aspect of your teaching role. That's totally fine. But on the application itself, teaching has its own carve-out, and teaching will be labeled as teaching. Yeah. But to be clear on that, just simply tutoring is not really going to work for leadership. You're going to need to kind of establish a tutoring organization where you've led other people, or you've delegated, or you've worked on a team, done some of those leadership skills. It's not as simple as show up, teach, and then we call that leadership. You know what I'm saying? All right. Yeah.
Sorry, just branching off of his question.
Yeah.
I used to be a part of like a nonprofit organization here on campus that involved like organizing food drives and like basic necessities and giving back to the community.
Love it.
We used to organize a lot of events surrounding that, go to different areas around campus and outside campus. Would this hold value, like taking it into my medical school application and talking about like the leadership that I gained through that?
100%.
Have to be more medical school related.
Totally. So there's 2 points here. Number one, when we're writing an effective application, I'm going to make a very long spiel short here. When I'm working with applicants, one of the strategies we use to keep an application fresh and unique is exactly what you're getting at. You need these stories at all the different parts of the application we've discussed, right? So you're going to discuss perhaps that experience in multiple different locations on the application. Maybe that comes up in your personal statement, but then you're also going to include it in the activities, and then maybe even include aspects of it in the secondaries, right? So each time along the way you're bringing up the same experience, I always recommend you use the stories to showcase a different skill, okay? So that experience, for example, is perfect for this. Number one, in the personal statement, you use it to showcase your passion for service, and you're telling the story about you as someone who wants to give back to the community. You're really in touch with the needs of your community, and you have a unique ability to set out to address those needs, okay? Personal statement, great. Now we come to the secondaries, or we come to the activities, and now you showcase leadership from that exact same experience. Now the details that you're giving me are details of your delegation, managing a team, coordinating these different events. Same experience, two completely different approaches, right? And you can do that with any experience in this application process. And what that does is it keeps it fresh and unique. Me, as the reader, I get this sense of, wow, there's so much new, fresh information here. It's really multidimensional because I know we're talking about the same thing, but man, the stories on paper are totally night and day different, and they're each showcasing a unique skill. So that is the beauty of an experience like that that's quite flexible, because you can use it in many different ways. Totally. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So I'm more of a non-traditional student. My time frame is a little longer than high school to university. So I want to know, what's the most relevant time frame to reference in like a leadership essay? Because like me, for example, my favorite leadership experience, and when I feel like I've had the most impact, is from probably like 2.5 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't plan on more than likely being in med school for another like 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
What would you say about that?
So anything from the time you started your 4-year graduate degree, undergraduate degree, is fair game, right? I don't want to hear about anything from high school, right? But anything from that point forward, particularly for a non-traditional applicant who is taking some time, is totally fair game. And it's very understandable in a situation like that for that story to come from 2 years ago. I totally get that. To make an important point, though, when we're getting into the world of clinical experience for an applicant that's been out of school for some time, we do want to see relevant, recent clinical experience. If you're telling me again you want to be a doctor, but you haven't seen a patient in 5 years, I'm going to be like, that doesn't quite work. But anything in that time frame is fair game. The only one that has kind of an expiration date will be clinical experience. Yeah, that's the most important. Yeah. All right, team, we got a motor here, because I got to put you to work with more of your admissions committee examples here in a minute. We talked a little bit about this. This is the service aspect of things. This is definitely the lowest hanging fruit in terms of your opportunity to kind of create something from scratch, go start a new experience, go find something in the community. You're going to be doing it anyway. You might as well turn it into an impactful leadership experience as well. Now, what we're going to get into real quick here are some of the secrets to how to write these entries effectively. Okay? Every activity entry that you're writing should have a purpose. It should have a key point. You should be illustrating one of those skills that we've talked about, right? So one activity, one skill. I know it seems simple, but you will be shocked at what this looks like in reality. Illustrate key points. Give me a tangible takeaway from your description. Now, let's go through some examples, and we're going to put our committee hats back on here. This is a research description. What do we think? Who likes it? Who doesn't like it? I should have mixed these up. I should have put the good ones first and then the bad ones second, so it's not as clear here, huh? Okay, so what's the problem here? There's many problems, but what do we kind of notice? Yeah?
There's no impacts, just the grunt work.
Totally, right? This is a seemingly endless list of random tasks that you did on random days. Yeah?
Also, we don't know what the research is about.
True. And that's an important point as well. And here, what you're giving me is this random list of stuff, right? Are any of these things going to help me determine whether you're going to be a good doctor, right? Is like growing cells and cleaning test tubes and doing these tasks in a lab, these gel electrophoresis. This is all my things that I did here on this campus. That's why I'm doing this, is that's what comes to mind. Are any of those things going to be relevant to you being a good doctor? No, right? So I don't want these details. I'm not interested in these details. So leave these details out. Big red X. Now, here, let's try this. Okay, what do we think? Who likes it? Wow, you guys are getting good at this. You guys are going to take my job. What do we like about this? Yeah.
What is the bridging the gap between research and medicine? So he's taking out like a tangible impact of what this experience is giving and how he can use that in medicine.
Totally. I completely agree. What else do we like? Yeah.
I have a question. So do you think for every activity you have to reference in the future when you're like a doctor and you're going to use whatever skills you learned in that position?
Not always. It'll get very repetitive very fast if you do it this explicitly every single time. But generally speaking, the reason that I have this here specifically is just to drive home the point that in writing, you need to be giving me a takeaway that is relevant to you as a doctor, right? And the only details that I want in these descriptions are those that are relevant to the point that you're making. So here we got this theme of teamwork and communication and kind of being the quarterback of the team in this lab, etc. Every detail that's included in this description is there for a purpose. There's no random I clean test tubes. There's no random I grew cells, right? Because we don't need those details to drive home the main point of your skill that you're illustrating here. This should be true of all of the descriptions. Every last one of them should have a purpose, and the only details that are going into your writing are those that are relevant to the main point. Green check mark there. We're going to do one more of these, and then I'm going to let you go here. Who likes it? Who doesn't like it? Okay. Problems here. I'll just cut to the point. Number one is this is all, even the verbiage here, right? The I observed. Really don't like that. It needs to be I did. I did these things. It can't be you watching something else happen. The other point here is that what is the takeaway here? What are you illustrating about watching somebody fill out paperwork or you filling out paperwork and organizing patient charts? How is that going to help you be a better doctor? Probably not, okay? So as you're going here, everything that you're putting into these descriptions, I want you to be asking yourself, as you're writing it in real time, each sentence, is this illustrating my point, number one? Number two, is this illustrating something that's going to be relevant to me as a doctor in the future? As soon as you write a sentence that is this random task that you did that has no relevance, it needs to be cut. You've only got 700 characters here. I'm going to read this in a matter of minutes. I need to take away a list of skills that are going to separate you from other applicants. The focus as you're writing needs to be on that. So here's a really good one here. This is obviously not a research lab experience. This is a clinical experience. But as I referenced earlier, there's this core theme of cultural competence and your ability to connect with others that are different than you. Every detail in here illustrates that point, and every detail is working towards showing me that you have that skill. And that's exactly how we want to write these descriptions. Okay? I think we've taken home that point. Now, what I'll leave you with is the final takeaway here. These kind of strategies that we implement are strategies that we bring with all of the applicants that we work with, okay? I want to again emphasize, when I was in your shoes, I didn't know any of this. I went through the application process without any of this information. But sharing things like this
and really perfecting that everything else category, particularly for stats that maybe aren't jump off the page outstanding. This is what makes or breaks you getting into medical school or you not getting into medical school. And that's really what we specialize with when we're working with applicants at MedSchoolCoach, is perfecting that writing and working on the details that are going to illustrate you as a doctor in the future. Okay, so the link is up here. I'd be happy to work with any of you going forward, and any of our advisors. There's 80 versions of me at the company who all do this same thing with years of experience. This is what we do, and we're more than happy to help at any point. Thanks, team. Any last burning questions? We did a lot along the way. I appreciate the questions. We did good with that. I'll hand it over here.
Thank you. We just wanted to quickly remind everyone, if you want more donuts or coffee, we'll take like a few minutes before the next speaker to take a break if you need to go to the bathroom or just want more food. And yeah.